Hello viewers, welcome to the Art Lounge Alley. This is Figure Drawing Basics part 99. It's getting closer to 100. We're a day away. And in fact, to celebrate the 100th stream of Figure Drawing Basics, there's going to be a special intro tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Usually special intros are at 9 p.m., but considering it is Figure Drawing Basics that reached 100, I'm going to be doing the special intro at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure you check back in tomorrow for this really cool special intro. It's not Gil Elfgren. That's going to be next week. Part 4 is going to be... Is it part 4 or 5 now? I think it's part 5. That's going to be next week. But Friday, it's going to be something new. It's going to be an animation. It's going to be 15 minutes, a 15-minute long animation, so there's still going to be time to cover some figure drawing basics before moving on to the project stream at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But for now, today, I am continuing on with this ongoing lesson, which is using boxes or the block form, this method to construct your figure, whether it's the hand, whether it's the head, which I will show you real quick, since this is going to be this is probably going to be the last of this lesson. But here is another example using box form for the head. So it's not only good for our hands, it's also good for the head. And in fact, you could use it for the entire body as a way of foreshortening. So you could start out with, let's say, if you wanted to do, more of a top-down sort of perspective of the human body, you could start out by drawing out the head at the top, and then slowly working your way down using other basic shapes like the cylinder shape, to construct the body until you hit the feet, basically. And it's all within this box that we've established. So just giving you guys a quick demonstration of how useful that could be if you're doing something like this, like a top-down thing. It allows you to kind of set the parameters, something that I say very frequently, of your drawing. You know, how far down is it supposed to go before it becomes disproportionate in comparison to the size of the head. Now the proportions become more challenging in this perspective, in the top-down and the foreshortening perspective, because you're not really relying on these very precise unit of measurements. But once you understand the body, once you understand where things are, in its proper proportion, that could be your measuring stick, basically. From that point on, you could say, okay, well, what have I learned? I learned that the hands are supposed to be way past the pelvic area, and just trying to define them a little bit more. The hands are supposed to be way past that. Also, the head is supposed to be, well, the width of the body is supposed to be 3 heads, and that's pretty much the same when it comes to measuring the width in this perspective, for example, in this top-down perspective. But really, it's just here, and there is more of a technique for it, and that's something that I'm probably going to get into further on. For now, I'm just kind of breaking things down into, as you guys have seen over the past few weeks, months, where I just kind of broke things down to focusing on specific parts of the body first, either the legs, the hands, the mouth, the ears, just kind of breaking things down to give you guys this idea of, like, you got to baby step your way up. If you're just learning, if you're just starting out, you can, of course, you could always challenge yourself and go beyond, right? But a sure way to get yourself more and more confident in your skill, in your ability, not to be overwhelmed, not to get frustrated because all those things don't come into fruition immediately. It's good to just baby step in. And in fact, this is something that I was thinking about today. This idea of when you were first starting out to draw, or you're first starting out to learn something, the result could be disheartening. And I think that also is what people think about when they're like practicing something. They're like, oh, I'm not a virtuoso. I'm not like this, quote unquote gifted person who sits down and immediately is able to draw the amazing drawings or play amazing music or write amazing poetry, whatever it is. It's just, that comes into play when you start to see that, like, not so great results or not immediate results, and people start to think in those terms. They're like, oh, it's only for people who are quote unquote gifted. But that's not really true. That is something that does happen. There are people who are predisposed to that, like they have, let's say their parents have been, and it kind of has been passed down to them, or whatever the case may be. There are people out there who just sit down and they're immediately able to produce whatever. The goal isn't to be like them. The goal is to get good at whatever it is that you're interested in, whether it is drawing or painting or writing or playing music or dancing, whatever art form, whatever self-expression art form you're choosing. It's really about that. It's about the art form itself. It's about really enjoying what you're doing, what you chose as your form of self-expression. And so how do you get past the disappointment? That's something that I was thinking about. Like, how do you get past that point where you aren't getting the results that you like? How do you keep yourself motivated if when you sit down, what you're producing isn't a final piece that looks amazing? Well, the answer to it is you enjoy small victories, or small results. I'm not going to even say victories, because it's not, I don't want to put it in that playground of like, victory, failure, or whatever else. It's a learning process. You're not gonna get the best results immediately. And even most advanced artists, there was always something to learn. There was always something that they look back on and they think like, oh, this isn't good, or I could do much better. So you just kind of have to accept that part of the experience, and you also have to enjoy the small steps, the small progress. You might draw an eye and it looks great, or you might actually draw something and it looked better than yesterday. And just kind of reveling in these little accomplishments, little goals that you set yourself. And each time you're like, oh, I did this better. So in some ways, just bringing it back around, it's great to break things down. Draw eyes often, over and over and over again. Draw lips often, over and over again. And as you get better and better at drawing, it builds up your confidence. You feel good because you're like, oh, I actually did a good job with this small part, this small section. It's not as overwhelming as having to nail down everything, nail down the proportion, nail down the relationship between each other, nail down anatomy, all of that. You're just zoning in on the specific part, lips, nose, eyes, eyebrows, ears, that sort of thing. And within those small accomplishments, within those small improvements, that's the word I'm looking for. Within these small improvements, you build confidence. You feel good. You set yourself a goal. You've met that expectation. Now you could move on to the next thing with that confidence. You can move on to something more challenging. But remember, all of it requires dedication and consistency of doing it daily. 2 hours is great. 3 hours is excellent. 4 hours, you're really getting into it. And by the time you hit 5 hours to 6 hours, you're not even counting hours anymore, because you're so into what you're doing and you want to see it complete, that hours just kind of go out the window. But it's in the first period that it's kind of challenging to push yourself and take it further and further and further. And I want to say it's kind of similar to like books, you know, reading certain books. You sit down, you read, and the first few chapters can be kind of challenging. You don't know really the characters, the scenes, or anything, or the storyline yet. The motivation isn't really there for you to keep going. But if you push yourself past those chapters, you start to develop more understanding of what's going on. You get more familiar with the characters, you get more familiar with the story and the settings, and then slowly, little by little, it just kind of builds and builds and builds, and before you know, you can't put the book down. You want to finish it, and you want to get to know what's going on, what's going to happen, what's next. It's a similar experience. It's just that pushing yourself past the beginning stages is the most crucial period. So anyways, yeah, so just getting back to this, breaking things down into more simple forms, using the box as your guide, you know, if you want to establish first what kind of perspective, and then use it to help you, to guide you through. And I think it's just an excellent example here because it's a building, and similar to a building, you want to first lay down the beams to make sure that the parameters are set, how long the building is going to be, similar to the head, how long or how wide the face is going to be, how wide the other plane of the head is going to be. You know, these are your beams, basically. You're laying those down before you start going into detail, before you start laying on the bricks. You know, you don't want to start laying the bricks and then before you realize that you don't have enough bricks. Same way, you don't want to start putting in the details and then realize that you don't have enough space. You know, your drawing is off page, or it's too small or too big or whatever. So, you know, there's just this like analogy between the two that really connect things. The process is kind of the same. It's the same approach. So the box form is great for that. The box form is great, or the block form, whichever. You're using that as a way to build things out. So you guys can also check out the previous streams by heading over to the video section and filtering it based on collection, which is going to open up folders for you. And in those folders, you guys can see all the previous streams for each of the streams that I have throughout the week, going back all the way to the first stream. And yeah, and yesterday I went into more in depth about how you could use the box form to create the face, and so on and so forth. But yeah, today I'm just going to continue on developing this box form right here, this block form for the hand. And for all the reasons that I just discussed, this makes it a lot easier as opposed to crossing your fingers and hoping, you know, no pun intended, that it's going to turn out right. It's going to be proportionate. It's going to, you know, the length of the fingers isn't going to be much longer than the palms, because that's something I discussed before. To just reiterate, if you measure your own finger, the longest finger you have, and then compare it to the size of the palm, you're going to see that it's not as long as the palm. I'm going to say for most people that's the case. So the palm is slightly longer. It's like an inch and a half, I'm going to say, longer than your longest finger. And I usually measure it up to where the wrist ends, like right about there, or rather where the wrist starts, where the joint is, where the hand folds. So that's my entire length of the palm. But yeah, as you could see, just measuring it from the base right here of your finger all the way down, it doesn't reach that place, so it's not as long. And you want to make sure that's the case. So yeah, just having this block form helps you with that, and also helps you with shadowing and shading. And as you guys saw from the previous stream yesterday, it was pretty much this, and I turned it. As you guys could see, there's still certain lines there to show its previous form, But once I started shading it, once I started to really filling it in and rounding off these really sharp corners that you see here, it started to look like this. This is essentially what it turned into. So I'm going to define this a little bit more. And then I'm going to do the same approach, and just to show you guys that method again. But I'm going to say the most important thing is understanding the limits of each feature on the hand. As I mentioned, the fingers, and when you draw this, I'm going to say toast. It kind of looks like a toast to me. When you draw the toast, you draw it in perspective. Also remember that the width at the top isn't as wide as it is at the bottom. There's more, I'm going to say muscle at the base than there is over here where the pads are, where it folds actually. And just to reiterate, actually, this is something that a lot of people don't recognize, is that the folding of your fingers, the final fold, isn't at the base over here, which is something that I thought was the case a while back. But the actual fold comes right here. This is the final fold. As you could see here, so the first fold is going to be halfway through the fingers here. You can't really bend unless you have some pressure at the top. You can't really bend the top part of the finger. Just want to make sure that it's in sight for you guys. Unless there's something pressing up here. So the first point where your fingers bend is at the half point of the fingers. And then this second one, at that point, you're able to curl the tip of your fingers. Now, to form a fist, it doesn't fold in from this point. It's actually lower. It's where the knuckle is. So take a look at this and pay attention to it. See that? It's rocking back and forth from the knuckle. So that's where your final fold is. It's actually right here. So that's really important for you to remember. That could visually could be a little bit confusing when you're drawing it, because you would imagine that it's up here, but it's actually at the knuckle. All right, so that's a little tip there for you guys. Just gonna move on to shaping this. So it's these, as you see, there's always minute little details, minute little things that can make a world of a difference, that can make or break the drawing, could make it convincing, or make it look amateurish, or make it look wonky. It could obviously spell that you're not grasping anatomy. It's taking the person out of the optical illusion of drawing, because essentially that's what it is. You're just drawing lines. You're not sculpting them. There isn't anything three-dimensional about it. It's the lines that you make that create this optical illusion for the viewers to see it three-dimensionally. It's just simple lines. You're just dragging a pencil across paper. So you want to make your drawing a convincing optical illusion in order to bring the audience in to your image. And the way you do that is by picking up on these little details that help you build a convincing drawing. And that's what really distinguishes a good drawing from one that isn't. Having to pay attention to these little things that really create a convincing drawing. Something I mentioned before, which is measuring the distance between, I'm just going to show it real quick here since I have it open, measuring the distance between the eye and the nostril. Huge difference. Something that will absolutely make and break your drawing. If this gap is incredibly long, your face looks wonky because everything else is going to be elongated. The head's going to be elongated. And because the head is going to be elongated and you use it as a unit of measurement, everything else is going to be elongated. And if it's not, it's going to make the head look even weirder because it's so disproportionate to the rest of the body. So just little things like that, as I mentioned, really could change things around. Paying attention to the angle, as you could see, everything is parallel in the direction of the angle of the head. So if the head is tilted, but everything else is lined straight, that's also going to look weird. So just bringing it back around to what I started out with, that's why it's easier to first... Oh no, did I just block it out of your vision again? Sorry guys, I have to pay attention to the screen as I'm showing it to you. But yeah, just here, this is what I was talking about. The distance between the corner of the eye and the nostril, this area. So if that's off, it's gonna break the drawing, as I mentioned. It's gonna make the face look really elongated. You also don't want to make it too short because that's gonna look weird. I mean, granted, in this example, it seems to be the case, but not as much, considering the shadow. If the shadow wasn't there, the eye would be actually further away from the nostril. But yeah, you don't want to do that either. So just having to watch out for that. And the best way to get more and more familiar, just like with anything else, is drawing from real life, drawing from photo references, drawing different types of faces, so you could recognize, oh, okay, this is where it crosses over, regardless of what kind of face I draw, where it crosses over and it starts to look weird. Alright, so this is pretty, I'm going to say it's well defined. So I'm going to do the same thing, but now I'm going to turn it into more of a three-dimensional object. To start off by drawing this toast. And the reason why I choose toast is sometimes it's easier in terms of association. It's easier to just remember a bizarre scenario than it is to remember more of like a technical sort of approach. Damn, this paper just isn't great. Isn't good quality sketchbook. So here I'm gonna divide it into 4 sections, like you guys saw up here. It really helps to maintain proportion. You don't want to draw the fingers way too wide. That's gonna throw off the perspective as well. And for those of you who are new, it is a beginning. It is an intimidating approach at first. But that's why it's useful to just break it down to just fingers, just hands, rather than the entire body in box form. And then once you grasp this, you could move on. Or if you, like I mentioned, if you really want to challenge yourself, if you feel like you could put up with frustration for your next challenge, go for it. And that's great. That's the best way. And it also, I think it would make you feel good about yourself and your determination. You know, being bold enough to take on even a bigger challenge than you're ready for, and then pushing yourself through it to see some results, and good results. Like that's also a confidence booster as well. You know, having to say like, yeah, I'm not great, but I want to see how much I can push myself to accomplish this next goal for myself. And that's a really good habit to get into. You know, continuously taking on these challenges. As long as you like it, you know, as long as you're enjoying it. If you're absolutely hating it, take a break. You know, take a break and then come back to it. But, and most importantly, you gotta be determined. So don't quit, just take a break. You know, similar story to that idea, something that is more of my personal experience, but just to like reiterate it, like I personally enjoyed, I like that challenge, and I kind of like how do I explain? I kind of like pissing off the irritated side of myself. So like if I'm super irritated about something, I like press into it by saying, well, I'm going to do it anyways. You know, I'm going to keep going with it. So, you know, for example, this is something that I mentioned before as an example, when I was working on a traditional animation, it was a website and it was a while back. I was using Flash, and Flash at the time was horrendous. It still is pretty horrendous. I don't think anybody uses it anymore. But it crashed. You know, I was working on something and I was like 2 days into it. Each day I was spending like close to 11, 12, maybe 14 hours working through it, and I really was enjoying it. Getting it all together, putting it together, getting the animation to be more fluent as the time went by, just more and more fluent, adding frames, changing things, and then suddenly I would see that spinning wheel of death. You know, it was just about, like, it started going for too long, and I thought maybe it's saving, maybe it's autosave, and it went on, and then boom, everything gone. All that work, those 2 days, those like 14 hours, like basically an entire 24 hours worth of work wiped out in a second. And there was so much progress, and I was so pissed. You know, I was just like ready to give up on it or just like scrap it or whatever. But in that moment, as I was just mentioning, it just came to me as like, you know, well, you're pissed off, we'll do it anyways. You know what I mean? I'm going to do it in spite of that feeling that I had, that frustration and that, like, you know, like all that time for nothing sort of thing. I was like, no, it's going to be all that time for something. And I sat through and I just brought it back and I made it even better. You know, I made that animation better than it was before. So I just kind of take that moment, you know, of like anger or frustration or whatever, and then I just go against it. You know, I start doing something against that emotion or that state. So if you ever do find yourself in that position, try that out. Maybe that could help you. You know, maybe that could really push you to do even better, to excel, to know that that's the typical response. That's something that happens, you know, and just not, and seeing yourself as better than that scenario. Like, I'm much better than this state that I'm in. You know, and if I'm capable of doing it, then I could do it again. And I think that's helpful for other things as well. It doesn't necessarily, like I mentioned, I think in the process of growing in your artistic endeavor and learning, you also grow as a person, because you could, all these emotions, all these feelings and ideas and thoughts throughout the process could kind of apply to other parts or other aspects of your life, you know, challenges that might bring about similar emotions or feelings or whatever else. And you could just kind of borrow those elements from your artistic learning practice into your personal life, you know, and have that help guide you in a better direction. Okay, so we're at this point again, similar to here. Now I'm gonna start constructing it. Now this is more, this is much darker. You know, when you're working on these shapes, as you see here, these block shapes, they're supposed to be a lot lighter, because again, they're like the skeletal structure, the beams. You don't want them to be all the way in the forefront. You just want them in the background, sort of helping you as you refine more and more of your drawing or whatever it is that you're working on. So it seems a little bit more challenging in this case because they're so defined, but I did want it to be visible for you guys, so the end results might not be as clean as they would be if I kept it light. So in this example, he's holding a baseball. And I'm just connecting these joints. Like you see the separation there, I'm just connecting those joints and giving them more of a round feel. And that alone instantly transforms your drawing to look more natural. Because I'm adding more skin, certain parts are going to be thrown to the back. You won't see all of the fingers. But as something I mentioned before, placeholders, right? They're just certain things that are just there, similar to the lines that you create on a face, right? When you do the crosshair in the middle of the circle to determine like where to determine if it's equal on both sides of the face, and where the lines for the eyes are going to be, where the lines for the nose are going to be. Those are just place marks. Once you start getting more into it, once you start defining certain things, you could shift things a little bit further up, a little further down, but they're just there to give you something to start from, to work on. It's not meant to be, what I'm saying is that it's not meant to be the final place for everything. There's still supposed to be room for you to adjust and change things around. So now that I established all that, I'm going to start cleaning up these lines. And I'm going to do the best that I can to clean up, since, as I mentioned, this paper isn't great. A, and B, I pressed too hard. For the sake of visibility for you guys. So cleaning up is going to be a little bit more of a challenge, and it's not going to look as clean as I'd like it to be. But I'm going to work with it. Can add a little detail for the baseball. A little shadow can help with the messy lines. But as you can see, I mean, just a general idea here, you guys can see the result. It's very different from where it was, which was originally this. You know, it started out looking like that, and eventually you could see the difference. And what really contributed to that difference, as I mentioned, rounding off corners, you know, rounding off the sharp edges really did that. It really brought out the realness to the hands. we are slowly approaching towards the end of the stream, which is pretty amazing actually, because it feels like it just started, to be honest. It doesn't feel like it's been an hour. Adding these little creases also in the fingers, like as I was doing over here, to show the bend of the fingers also really helps. Once again, my new little details transforming the drawing into something even more realistic. And I'm always so fascinated by that, you know, especially like something that I mentioned before, like the corners of the mouth, and this is something that is more visible here. Like just these little details can change a smile from looking more serious to having a bit of a smirk. You know, just little things like that instantly change the feeling of the drawing. And I find that to be so cool. It's these optical illusions, man. I think that's what kind of fascinates me about drawing in general. You know, in sculpting, it really is present, yeah, and it resembles, depending on how much effort you put into it, it could resemble a really real looking face. And you could see it three-dimensionally, you could change it around, very similar to what an actual person is like, or an actual object is. Whereas drawing, it's just a piece of paper. It's this, you know, flimsy thing that's capable, that you're like, with the right amount of detail, with the right amount of skill, you can create, you know, an entire world that feels like you could just dive into it, you know, or a person that's looking right back at you. I think that's incredible. I think it's really, really fun. I don't have enough time to jump into like another hand, but maybe I could do something real quick. Something that you guys have seen before. Starting out like another block form, kind of. And building from there. Kind of divide it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Making sure that the fingers are different in size, as I mentioned, and not as long as the palms. Middle finger being the longest finger, which is subjective. There are people who have their ring finger, you know, this finger being slightly or almost comparably as long. But I'm going to say on average, the middle finger is the longest finger for most people. I'm going to say nails are also a really challenging detail as well. Like if you don't draw them properly in perspective to how the fingers are, it also can break the drawing. A small detail as that makes a big difference. And that's kind of how I learned to do realism. Like when I was younger, I would just push myself to sit down and draw whatever the reference was as close to the original as possible. I'm talking about tiniest, most small details. I would just sit and focus on it. And honestly, I had a great time with it. I didn't even notice how the time flew by. Before I knew it, it was like 15 hours in, and the drawing was looking great. It's just, and for me, you know, once I get into that zone, there's nothing more fun than that. You know, initially, it's challenging to sit down and do it, but once I'm there and I'm in that zone, it's the best. I wouldn't want to do anything else. And with that said, everybody, I'm going to take a 5-minute break, and I will be back for the project stream. I did a lot more work on there. I'm pretty excited, as always, to show you guys the progress, to show what it looks like. It's getting closer to being finished. Not quite, but still, you know, it's there. I'm going to say, as I mentioned before, it's like 85% finished. And I'm going to be starting a new project very soon, so that's going to be cool as well. I'm still deciding on what that's going to be, if that's going to be something that I was thinking about for a while, like fan art of the series called Grimm. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. For those of you who are, shout out to you. Post some comments about who your favorite was. But yeah, there was this one scene that was so cool, and I just like took a picture of it, and I kind of want to do fan art of it because it looks so cool. So I don't know, either that or I'm gonna do another rendition of a character that I have in mind, or the same character but in just a different scene that I also have come up in my imagination. But stick around for that. You know, it's something that's going to be coming up maybe next week, maybe, depending on this weekend, how much I put into it, if I have enough time for it. But anyways, and also, you guys make sure, for those of you who can't stick around, make sure to tune back in tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you missed that announcement, it's going to be the 100th stream of Figure Drawing Basics at the Art Lounge Alley. So I'm going to celebrate with a special intro. It's going to be a 15-minute animation. Very cool concept, very beautiful animation work. Philosophical idea, mature content. Just be warned. NC-17, there's some things that are, you know, that can be, adult content related. But yeah, check back in tomorrow, and I can't wait to watch it with you guys. Actually, I always have a good time checking it out. All right, everybody, if you enjoy this content, just make sure you remember to hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you in the next stream. Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Art Lounge Alley. This is project part 68. And this is where I am in the project. Did a lot of work actually on this one. There was a point where I was kind of unsatisfied. I was like, I don't know. I just don't feel like it's close to how I pictured it, how I imagined it. So I went about and fixed a lot of things. I went over the line work. Just cleaned up the lines more, defined them a little bit more, and obviously put a lot of colors in. There's still some things to do, and I still want to tweak around with the colors. I changed the background as well. I changed the colors in the background. But there's a lot of refining to do. You know, just going and zooming in and filling in these little areas. I'm going to start out with, maybe I should start out with the very background and just cleaning things up that way. So I'm going to do buildings and see how much I can clean up and how much I could fix. I'm gonna zoom out to see. It's not bad. It's at that point where I have to be careful and I don't want to overwork the drawing, and I have to pick my battles carefully. Like, I don't want to add nitty-gritty details to the backgrounds, you know, as they should be towards the back. You know, they shouldn't have to pop out as much, let's say, as what's going on in the foreground. You know, so just gonna have to spend some time, make sure that yeah, it's done right. Clean this up. Whoa, just make sure all these little areas are properly filled in. These little corners. And I saw some here actually. I'm just not satisfied with. Somewhere here. Maybe it wasn't here. It was this building right here. Had way too many gaps. And I'm still like, I don't know, 50-50 on the sky and the color of the sky. So I might end up working on that some more today. I'm going to go ahead and say that the inspiration for this building right here, the one that I just worked on, is a modem. Like, it looks like the top of it just reminds me of like a modem. I wouldn't be surprised if that's really where the idea manifested itself. Uh-oh. Oh no. I just realized that because I have this layer, colors are turning out to be a little different. So I don't know about you guys, but on the topic of the election, something that I have been talking about these past few days since it is the midterms, I do find that there is value in voting. You know, I think it's better than not doing anything and allowing basically the fascist party to start achieving their goals. But I don't find it to be foolproof. You know, that there are multiple things that come into play when it comes to that stuff, you know, especially the more zealous people become in it, the more boundaries they're willing to cross, you know, and there is no way for us as people to really know what goes down, you know, politically, like who ends up becoming corrupt, who ends up being bought out, right? Like what kind of measures people are taking the more opposition they get, you know, what sort of things they could do. So you know, I do still think it's important to vote, and I voted, absolutely. I hope you guys did too. But I don't rely on it. You know, I don't think that the wings are really that different. You know, that I think essentially they all want you to depend on them, because if you don't depend on them, that means they don't get the taxes and the campaign money and all that funding and everything, to convince you that they're fit for the position of exploiting your money, basically. So they want you reliant. So they're not gonna do a lot to actually make things better for you. As you guys have saw, the most important thing, I think, and it's really interesting how the focus has shifted to things that don't really improve the economy as much. Like, they might improve your individual rights, right? Like, for instance, of course, abortion is important for things like rapists, those crazy fucking people that are out there who are doing insane, disgusting things, incest, like all that other stuff. That it absolutely has to exist, without a doubt. But it was there before, and now it was taken away because of political meddling, right? They decided to stick their nose into that private business. And of course, to make things more difficult for the opposing party, because that's their tactic. It's always been their tactic. Whenever they're not in power, they create as many problems as possible and then blame the party that it's opposing them as the ones responsible for it. Basically lying, manipulating, gaslighting to get votes and to get people to sign up for them instead. It's just a disgusting tactic. The dishonesty while still talking about religious values. Like, we're religious people. Meanwhile, they're manipulating and exploiting people. Anyways, but yeah, just this idea. And at times, I'm sure they work together to maintain this power, basically, over people, so that they could continue to exploit taxes. We don't get to choose where our taxes go. That's one. If our let's say your neighborhood isn't great, the roads are damaged, the public schools are failing and they're awful, teachers aren't getting paid well, all that stuff, you could say, I want my taxes to go there. I want my taxes to improve the schools locally. I want my taxes to improve road conditions. I want my taxes to provide livable wages or improve libraries or facilities for people to grow, learn, and do something with their time, and to know that their taxes are being used for improving conditions, so that we could be happy with the economy, with the leaders, with people, and how they're utilizing our hard-earned money. But instead it's being used for, as you guys have seen, even during a moment where it was absolutely crucial for people to start taking responsibility for their jobs and their position, they were giving tax breaks to corporations, basically corporations that banked off of other people's hard work, and continued to tell people to go out and make even more money for those corporations. It was just repulsive, but now, even when those same people aren't in position to make these kind of rules and regulations, we're not seeing much improvement. We're not seeing businesses actually making decisions that benefit the economy. In fact, businesses are just making decisions to benefit themselves. But the way they benefit themselves is from the economy, from the people. So they don't want to give back to the people, they just want to take from people. And there's no regulation for that. There is nothing that says hey, you can't do that. You're part of the economy. You're depending on people who depend on the economy. You can't just completely detach yourself and just bank off of it. That's exploitive. That's corruption. That's not what we're here for. As politicians, we're here to make sure that you guys stick by the rules that everybody else is following. People are following the rules which you're banking off of. them paying taxes, them contributing towards your business in a proper manner, not following the rules and regulations for it. And consequences shouldn't only apply to them. It should also apply to these corporations, which they're trying to avoid. They're trying to figure out ways not to do it while demanding that everybody else does. So it's this double standard bullshit, basically, that people are putting up with for some reason. They're like, yeah, it's okay that these corporations are exploiting us and that they're trying to avoid all the responsibility while loading more and more of it on workers, and at the same time telling them that their time and dedication isn't worth raises, isn't worth living conditions. It's just worth the time that we need to get more money. So it's the sickness. It's an absolute sickness. I'm not saying that as a jab out of dissatisfaction. I think that these people who are making these decisions, who are running these businesses, are absolutely mentally sick. Like, that's why greed is considered to be a sin. It's not just a slap on the wrist by somebody who just doesn't like it. It's because it's something that festers inside of a person, and then in the wrong hands, it ripples through society, as you see it now. So anyways, like what I'm getting at is that even though I voted, I don't depend on that system to fix anything. They've been doing this for generations. They're playing a lot of things, and as I mentioned, they want you to depend on them. So they're gonna give you very little while taking a lot. That's just their approach, And until people actually come together and say, listen, we're paying you taxes to do your job. You're not doing us a favor by doing your job. You're there because we voted for you. You're there because you promised us that you were actually going to look out for our best interest, which is what the job is about. And you're doing the opposite. So it's time for you to go. And people have to kick them out, regardless of others who are pro their corruption, because there's always going to be people who are supporting that because it supports their corruption. They're basically saying, like, hey, we're going to enable people who are going to help us justify our corruption. And there are way more people being exploited than there are people exploiting. So I think and what that does is it ripples through, right? It creates anger, it creates frustration, it creates really insane scenarios, things that if we're around to see, we would be appalled and we'd be like, that's really depressing, that's awful, so rather than standing aside and pretending that it's not there, it's better to come together and change things so that they don't continuously repeat and they don't exacerbate to a point of a pandemic. None of us liked when that happened. A lot of people were scared, I'm sure. A lot of people were like, what is going on? And felt helpless. But now that things are back in order because we took action as people, everyone's lighting up again and they're just like, oh, it's okay. Oh, what? We got Nazis basically trying to gain more and more leverage and power, or regain as much leverage and power, and what's the big deal? So it's this bad decision that is coming back around of just like not finding it important enough to really push for big change. I think just making the demands by protesting all the time and being at the White House basically with protest signs. And I'm not inciting violence, I don't agree with that, but peaceful protests that cause disruption, that's what protests are. If they're not causing disruption, they're not a protest, it's just people standing around. The difference between people standing around and a protest is that it's disruptive. that there's a lot of people and they're making demands that, hey, we're not happy with your leadership, with your use of our taxes, with your decision on how to improve the economy. You're not doing any of that. In fact, people who are exploiting all of us are getting more and more while we're getting less and less, and that's just making things worse. It's bringing about depression, it's bringing out drug and alcohol abuse, just creating more problems. There's environmental disasters. Like any of the businesses, right, running, if they were to face that many problems, they would instantly fire people. Just be like, get out. You're not doing a good job. You're making our business look worse. But for some reason, this sort of business, people aren't taking enough action on it. But yeah, so, even though I did vote, I still think the power lies with the people, not within politicians and their policies and how they're, getting carried away here. This is the ground, so I'm going to go with the ground layer. So it's important to organize, and instead of giving into this divisive sort of tactic that a lot of these fascist corporations are using, which is like firing, as you guys seen in social media, people are getting fired from companies that are well known for being exploitive. Facebook, right? Like, and all the amount of propaganda that they are allowed, and all the amount of spying that they've done, basically infringing all of your privacy without any restraint. No, and then Twitter with all that nonsense going on. None of these companies are trustworthy companies. They're in fact the opposite of that. They're backing basically all the fascist politicians and policies and so on and so forth. And they're basically doing that. Like they're making people more and more dependent on them, or actually just putting more and more people on board who follow their fascist agenda. They're firing people who are saying no to it, who are actually trying to create a fair, honest and decent condition. And instead, I'm sure they're going to be hiring people who favor the opposite of it. And that's huge. That's problematic, because once more and more social media, like Facebook is Meta, and Meta is Instagram, Meta is Facebook, Meta owns other companies as well. The more and more they choose to disrupt these things, the more people continue to use those apps, they're going to enable it more and more. And I think it's important for us to talk about it with people and spread more and more of this idea, so that people could be aware of, like, hey, we need other social media platforms that aren't going to put money in the pockets of people who support fascism, who support oppression, who support racism, who support like sociopathic culture. All that stuff is driving things worse and worse. It's making people more and more indifferent. It's making people more and more sociopathic. I don't care. It doesn't apply to me. That approach. It's the same thing as, like, let's say if people were being thrown in the gas chamber. I don't care. It doesn't apply to me. What's the difference between you? Let's say, not you specifically, but what's the difference between somebody who says that and somebody who was part of the fascist regime, the Nazi party, and somebody who stood aside when people were being gas chambered? And they're waiting basically for that opportunity again, where people are so indifferent and so responsive to authoritarian sort of conditions so that they can continue to push for that scenario. There is an experiment like that actually, and I forget exactly what the name of it was, but basically they had somebody come in. They conducted an experiment where they had a person come in into a lab room, and they sat them down and they said, okay, we're going to have you press these buttons, and it's going to send a shock to the person in the other room, so we're going to need you to do that. And the person's like coming in with a clipboard, they're wearing like a lab coat, and the person who's sitting there was like, okay. So he goes and he sits down, presses it sends in a shock, and he hears another person in the other room screaming, and he's like, oh my God. And you could see immediately that the person has a reaction to it. They're like, oh, is that person okay? And they're like, well, don't worry about it. This is part of the experiment. We need you to up the voltage and then send the shock again. And then the person is like, all right. And again, they do it. And then the person screams in agony again. This time it's even more. And then the person's concerned, and the other person in the lab coat is like, okay, we need you to up the voltage and send in the shock again. And each time they're telling this person to up the voltage more and more, and the person's hearing the other one in the other room screaming in more agony. And they're not saying like, hey, why am I doing this? Let me stop doing this. I'm not enjoying the fact that this person's in excruciating pain. Like, what's the purpose of this? And are they okay? Just because they're told to do something based off of these really superficial things like lab coat and a clipboard, basically these authoritarian sort of dress codes. People were just saying okay to it, so and of course in the experiment there was no person in the other room. It was just somebody there who was screaming because they knew that's what they had to do. They weren't actually getting any shocks, but it was just an experiment to see like, how do people react to these kind of things? Like when they see a certain uniform or whatever else, then that means that I should be doing it without question. And that's basically what all these capitalists and fascists are pushing towards, especially during the pandemic, right? People were like just marching to their death, going in to work, catching the virus, coming back home. If they had kids, like they didn't think about that. They weren't like, oh, I have kids, they're gonna get sick, they might die. Like my own kids are gonna die because of this like sick system of these people who are total sociopaths. They don't care about anything other than just numbers, and getting more and more money. Tell me that's not a sickness. It's absolutely a sickness. There is nothing there's nothing that's more valuable than another person's life like that. That's insane. But people weren't questioning it. So basically it's just that experiment all over again, and people were just like going along with it. They were complying with it. So we just have to fight against that, because we can't have another regime like that. That's insane. It's sick. And we need to come together as people and actually start protesting. Because again, as I mentioned, I don't believe it that these wings, there is a reason why they're called wings, right? You got the left and right wing. What are they a wing to? A body. They're a wing to a body that is basically trying to maintain its power over the people to make sure they continue to serve and give them money and profits. So there's a lot of corruption there. And if it's referred to as a wing, that means they're flapping together to make sure everything continues to fly. Right? So it's kind of difficult to say how much of this is actually orchestrated, how much of it is honest. So what we are seeing is people are getting discarded more and more. Like nothing is improving. Education systems aren't getting better; they're getting worse. Banning books, like what is this, 1984? Like that, and the fact that it is like 1984, and that's an action done. Like also like Fahrenheit 451. That's another tale talking about these exact same mistakes, these problems that arise once these sort of actions come into play. It's like by the book, basically. These things are happening, and people are just like, well, I guess. Not challenging it, not being like concerned, And it's not just, and I'm going to say it's not just the government. There's definitely people who believe in the fascist regime. It's not just people who are working in a government who are like, yep, let's do that. There's a bunch of people who are brainwashed, who are brain damaged, who support that and agree with it. It's a sickness. It's just as much of a sickness as greed. Hubris is one of the sins. That's arrogance, basically. And again, it's a sin because it is parasitic, and it's like a virus. It spreads. It doesn't only spread within your mind and your body, it also spreads to other people. So, these things are there to say, like, hey, don't do these things because it's going to drive things into chaos. It's going to make things worse all around. And when one person thinks that way, another person thinks that way, and they start, especially if they have power, right? If they have, like, influence, and there's a lot of people who listen to them because they're like, oh, this person's successful, this person can get anything or has all the things that I want, so I'm going to try to listen and mimic what they do and what they say and how they act. And then little by little, before you know it, there's like an entire basically groupie form around them, doing as they do and as they say, without really thinking about the whole morality of it and how crazy and insane it is. So we got to start demanding better conditions, and something that I mentioned before. There is, in history, back in the day, people were working like children were working. And I'm talking about 10, 11-year-olds, 8-year-olds were working in factories and dying under terrible conditions because people wanted more profits. They wanted more money. So these are serious things that have happened in history. Hold on a second. Yeah, these are things that happened, and we could learn from that. We could be like, that's problematic. Like, this is what the outcome is going to be if we keep following that. This is we have like enough in history to show, like, if we do these things, this is where it's going to lead. This is how problematic things are going to get. I don't like that. I think it's a little too dark. But I do want to change it around a little bit. Maybe make the glass a little bit darker. But yeah, just going back to what I was getting at, you know, the idea that back in the day, you know, there were all those conditions that created so many problems, so much issues. And people came together, they protested, they demanded change over and over and over again. You know, there was a point where people gathered and they said, hey, we got to come together and we got to make sure that this is enacted. And we got to do as much as we possibly can until it is set into law. So they banned child labor. You know, they had that banned. They also made it law that 8 hours was the max that they would work. Because back then it was 16 hours. You know, sometimes it was like 11 to 16 hours that people were working, basically. And of course, meager wages, terrible wages. But people came together and they were like, no, we got to make sure that things change. They change towards the better. And because they came together and they were determined, they were protesting and they shut down the economy to make sure that people understood, like, hey, we're together on this as people. We're going to make sure that this comes to fruition. Like, we are determined, no matter what, to make lives better for ourselves and to prevent you guys from, like, abusing our taxes and abusing us as people who are providing you with the opportunities to be these exploitive nut jobs, basically. And basically that's what we have to do as well. You know, we have to, at some point, as generations start to shift, right? As the old die out and the young take over, the same mistakes are going to be made. So as people, we have to come together and send that same message as they had to back then as well. See, I'm trying to see if I could spot any other areas that have like little gaps in between colors. Yeah, so like one of the things that we have to demand is livable wages. You know, that isn't being fixed at all. That's something that I think is incredibly important that would benefit everybody. You know, people are focusing on things, as I mentioned earlier, like they're focusing on abortion, which is, again, it is important. But what really makes people's lives better, you know, what really helps them choose or make better decisions is basically getting livable wages, being able to afford things, not being freaked out about, you know, food prices now that are skyrocketing as well, rent that's skyrocketing, like all those things really determine people's actions. So to complain about, there's crime and then there's like disasters and it's because people are doing stupid things. Well, one of the reasons why is because they're desperate for certain things and they end up making bad mistakes out of those scenarios. So it's all systemic, to defund education systems and then complain about people making stupid mistakes, or bad decisions or crime, not providing livable wages, and complaining that people are, committing crimes and doing drugs and all the other stuff. Well, yeah, they're going to do all those things because they have miserable living conditions. So as I mentioned, because it is systemic, you can't depend on the system that's creating these problems systematically. That is purposely taking your tax money and making it worse all around. And that's why I say it's really important that people come together and they start forming these protests everywhere. It shouldn't be centralized to like one area. It should be everywhere, to pose a problem to all these people who are exploiting everybody, basically making things a lot worse. And in return, it is creating these environmental disasters as well, because again, people are taking shortcuts to pocket more money because of all this greed that's going on. It's rippling through, and it's unsustainable, basically, is what I'm getting at. While other countries are actually booming economically, because they're listening to the people. They're actually trying to improve the lives of the people so that the people don't turn against them and make it worse for them. So this is like, it's more than just, war on women and their rights to choose and their rights to decide what to do and all that stuff. It's more, it's very much a class war that we're dealing with, and a lot of people who are basically, or consider themselves to be in the upper class, because they're exploiting people, because they're exploiting the system to make more money, they're banding together, as you see these corporations, and they're using these tactics of firing people, raising prices that don't make any sense, that don't have anything to do with inflation. Like that's something I mentioned before. They're saying, it has something to do with the war. It has something to do with this shortage or that shortage. Why is Netflix raising the monthly fee? What is there a shortage of for Netflix? Internet signals? There's a shortage of internet signals. You know what I mean? Like, it's nonsense. They're absolutely doing things to put the press on people while continuing to exploit them, while more and more people are dying off from their negligence. We can't have a political system like that. It's unsustainable. It creates a terrible ethos. It echoes through people and how they treat each other, how they see everybody, what kind of state of mind they're in. It's this like, everybody for themselves is perfect for them. It's perfect for them. Like, people are following the book of exploitation to the T here. Like, how do you get people to band against each other? Scarcity. You make it so that they're just they're freaked out and they need to do as we tell them to, otherwise, they're going to be in that scarcity realm. And rather than people seeing that and being like, hey, let's band together and just like make it really difficult for them, protest, be outside of the White House with protest signs demanding change, demanding that our needs are addressed, our needs for livable wages, our needs for progressive jobs and progressive environments that appreciate their workers rather than gaslighting them, making them think that they're useless so that they could pay less money. You know, that's corporate greed. That's something they're detaching themselves from the economy and focusing on profits. And we can't have that. You know, we need regulations that bring stability to the economy, that bring stability to our lives. You know, we're not here to live for their profits. We're here to live and enjoy life. And I think a lot of people need to wake up to that. Instead of like serving and playing these team games, like, oh, I'm team this, I'm team that. Dude, you're, at the end of the day, none of these people that you're teaming for or rooting for give a damn about you. Like, you'll die tomorrow and they'll be glad. I don't care. So like these people who are like, oh, Elon Musk is right, or this person's right, they wouldn't touch you with a 10-foot pole. Like, none of them would care about you. Like, if you're around there and you tell them how much you care, they'll just laugh at you and move on. You know, but they think that because I'm supporting them, that I'm like them in some way. It's a weird sickness. That's what I'm saying. Like, some people are mentally damaged. It's this like crazy spite game that they're playing, which is against their own personal interest. Like, that's mark of crazy. Where spite is more important than their livelihood. If that's not crazy, I don't know what is. But yeah, I'm absolutely confident that is a sign of a crazy person, and we can't rely on them to dictate or care about what they have to say, to dictate the economy and dictate the direction that the economy is going in. When we recognize that there are crazy people who are inciting all sorts of stupid approaches to social interaction, we can't give them the time of day. Like, it's not important what they have to say. They're just being insane. And we have to interact with people who are more sane in order to move towards progress, not get stuck in their stupid loops. But that's my rant, everybody. It's an important one. I think that regardless of what political outcomes are, I think that it's an important trajectory, because they're still, despite whatever the outcome is, they're not addressing the most crucial things, which is great education systems, livable wages, livable hours. You know, the hour thing is really important, because you're spending your entire day earning them profits. Just do the math from the time that you get up to the time you get home. And by the time you eat and you finish, what are you left with? There's barely any time. And that's why people lose sleep. That's why they get sick. They don't get enough sleep. They're haggard. They're frustrated because they don't get enough sleep, because they're trying to enjoy as much of their day as possible before repeating the same thing for exploitive companies. Why? There is nothing that says, this is how things should be, other than greedy, deranged companies that people have been programmed to accept as the way. But as history showed, as I mentioned, you guys should read about the 8-hour, where that came from, how that came about, and you'll see that it's changed from even more of an exploitive condition because people came together and they said, hey, we've had enough. Like, we gotta change things towards the better. We can't just let these people free reign our lives and our livelihood. So don't get discouraged by the political outcomes if they're not in a progressive direction. The important thing is to come together and actually demand that change. If there's thousands and thousands of people outside of the White House on a daily basis, they're going to listen. On a daily basis, that's chaotic for them. And they're going to have to listen to what people are saying. So the more people organize this, the more that they do it everywhere, not just centralized. People are saying, okay, we have to pick this day, we have to connect with one another. And regardless of what is being said, because there's definitely going to be people who bullshit or try to talk you out of it or whatever else, no matter what, we have to come together and we have to protest and demand change. That's the only way we're going to have progress. You know, as Sanders says, an economy and political system that works for everybody in progress, not just for the oligarchs, not for people who exploit others. You know, it's not a sustainable system. It's going to create more and more sociopathic, exploitive people, because everybody's going to be like, oh, in order to make it, I have to be like these nut jobs. It's going to create a very unsustainable environment of everybody just being awful to each other at all times. That's a terrible future. So we gotta come together and start doing things. You know, don't depend on these politicians. Don't depend on what they say, what they promise. These problems have been going on for generations, everybody. I'm not just talking about the past 10 years or 20 years. This is like 40, 60, 70, 80 years, 90 years, if not longer. So there's been some spot cleaning throughout the stream. I did find it important to discuss this, y'all, just because the midterms are we're in that state right now. So I am going to be talking about it more in the future, but today it pretty much took up most of the stream, I'm going to say. But since I do have to call it quits for the night, I do want to remind you guys that tomorrow is going to be a special intro. It's going to be the 100th stream of Figure Drawing Basics, and I'm going to be celebrating it by showing you guys this really cool 15-minute animation. It's beautiful work all around, really cool message. It is adult content. It's going to be NC-17, just to warn you guys, so look out for that. But tune in tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to check it out. I'm excited to show it to you guys. I'm excited to watch it with you. And yeah, I'll see you then. If you guys enjoy this content, just remember to hit the like and subscribe button. They both help the stream. They're absolutely appreciated by yours truly. And they help reach out to a wider audience. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you tomorrow.